So again, the purpose of today's call is to walk you through a LockDown browser training, and we'll certainly be walking through tips and best practices as well. Now, the LockDown browser, very important to understand, it is a custom browser, and the browser itself was engineered to prevent cheating during online assessments. So it's an application that will prevent students from navigating to other resources once they launch their assessment within the framework of the learning management system. It was engineered for proctored types of environment and also for in-classroom types of settings originally. It is an application that integrates with most of the major learning systems, but for our purposes today, we're going to keep our conversation limited to the Canvas LMS. When your students are using the LockDown browser, it's important to understand that they will be prevented from opening up any area that will allow them to copy, print, or paste their content. They will not be able to capture any screen content, so they cannot use programs like Snagit while they're taking their assessment. They will not be able to navigate to other websites, and there are a couple of exceptions to this rule, and those are a little bit more specific to whether or not an instructor might embed a hyperlink within a question type. And we can certainly talk about that a little bit more. In terms of other applications, the LockDown browser will prevent students from opening up any other type of application, such as an instant messenger, or even possibly the Microsoft Office application, such as Microsoft Word or Excel, or any other type of browser. Now, the LockDown browser, today we're going to cover this initially from the instructor perspective, and we're going to talk about how instructors add the requirement for LockDown browser for their assessments. So I'm going to navigate to my instance of my learning system, and this is actually my instance of Canvas, and I've actually logged in with my instructor level credentials. So first I'm going to navigate to my courses, then I'm going to navigate to the course that I have instructor rights to, which is Geography 101. Now, once the LTI has been set up for Canvas, you'll notice in the left-hand margin that there's an option for the LockDown browser. And it's titled LockDown Browser Dashboard. Now, once the dashboard itself loads, you can see that I have a couple of columns that are available to me. There's a column for quizzes, there's a column for LockDown browser, and there's also a column for Respondents Monitor. Now, I'll briefly explain that Respondents Monitor is a companion webcam application to the LockDown browser. It is available here at this point on my screen because I have all of our applications enabled that are Respondents applications. For our purposes today, we're going to limit our conversation to the LockDown browser. So in your instance, you'd be seeing a column for quizzes and a column for the LockDown browser. Now, the very first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to open up or select the quiz that I'd like to work with. Now, for my purposes today, I'm going to select the Geography Quiz Week 2. You'll notice next to this quiz, to the left-hand side, there's a context menu. I simply select my context menu, select my option to modify my settings. The first thing I do is require the use of LockDown browser for this particular assessment. And then I have some additional options that are available to me underneath the advanced settings. The area titled Monitor Webcam Settings would not be used. It would not be visible to faculty unless we had Monitor enabled on the server level. So for our purposes, we're going to simply stick to LockDown browser. I'm going to click on my advanced settings, and then I'm going to walk through these settings and talk a little bit about what the settings themselves mean. So the first option, if I leave this box unchecked, I can take advantage of what we refer to as early exits. This explain link just walks through a definition of what early exits is. Now, early exits allows a student to safely leave an assessment if there's some type of an emergency. So in a situation, perhaps maybe in a proctored lab or maybe a classroom environment, if the internet connection goes out, or maybe a student gets sick in class, if the instructor leaves this box unchecked, the student, if they try to leave the assessment, will be prompted with a series of dialog boxes. The first dialog box will warn them that if they continue to leave the assessment, their instructor will be notified. If they continue to leave the assessment, they'll be prompted with a second dialog box that will ask them to give the instructor a reason as to why they're leaving the assessment. The next option allows students to take an assessment with an iPad. So if that's something you're looking to allow, you'd simply check this box, and this explain link will take you to some information on our website. In the initial part, of this explanation, we'll walk through the navigation path that we just walked through verbally, and we'll explain to the instructor how to add the requirement for a student that is using an iPad. The second part below provides you with student-facing information and explains to the student where to go to download and install the LockDown Browser app. These instructions, I'm told, will be changing within the next several weeks because we are eliminating the latest version of LockDown Browser will be pushed out in early January for the iPad, and this will eliminate the use of guided access from this direction list. And this will be updated as soon as that update is pushed out. So this will change slightly in the next several weeks. The next option allows access to specific external web domains, and this allows you to add access to a root domain URL. So this is specific to linking to an ebook if the instructor chooses to do so. If that's something that's of interest to the instructor, they would add the domain URL here, and then they would also add the URL within the text of the assessment itself. This, in effect, is whitelisting that ebook so that the student can have access to it during the assessment. The next option enables the use of a calculator on the toolbar. If I select this option, I can decide if I'd like the student to use either a standard calculator or a scientific calculator and have it become available on the toolbar when they launch the LockDown Browser application. The next option enables printing from the toolbar. So this is used rarely, and it's typically used in the event that if you have a student that may not be able to take their assessment in a traditional manner in the classroom environment, you might allow the student to take advantage of using a private proctor that's been approved by you as a faculty member, and then in that instance, you may allow them to print the assessment, perhaps the proctor is signing it, and then it's being returned to you as the instructor. Once you've selected your settings, then it's just a matter of clicking Save and Close. Now you'll notice at this point, under the Geography Quiz Week 2, it now has the requirement for the Respondent's LockDown Browser as part of the name of the quiz, but then also under the LockDown Browser column, it is showing up as required in green. A couple of other things I do want to make mention. When we originally walked through the advanced settings, we talked about locking the students into the browser or leaving this box unchecked and taking advantage of early exits. Now, as I said earlier, early exits allows a student the ability to leave the assessment early, but again, they would need to provide you with additional information. If a student takes advantage of an early exit, on the instructor side, you would actually see next to this context menu, a number that shows up in a circle. In that circle would be in orange. And the number that is inside the circle is in direct relationship to the number of early exits for that assessment. So now here you can see underneath, and this is a different quiz, it's not the same quiz we were working with. Instead of just having the option to modify my settings available, there's also an option to review early exits. So were you to see that type of an indication where you see the circle with a number inside it, you can click on the review early exits, and you can see exactly why the student left the assessment. And it will populate with their name, the date of the assessment, and the date they took advantage of the early exits. Now, from the student's perspective, it is important to understand that if the student is working with a BYOD device, so if it's a device that the institution doesn't manage and doesn't own, there is a custom unique install that the student will be working with. It is specific to your institution, and this is something that should be provided to the student either within the course syllabus or perhaps within the course itself. We always recommend that it's in a password protected area so that you're restricting access to that link because it is unique and specific to your institution. The LockDown Browser is available for use with Windows computers, Mac computers, but also, as I said, you do have an iPad version that's available. There is an app currently available for it, certainly, but we are pushing out an update by January 15th. The other option, as I referenced earlier, is using the application in a lab type of environment with the browser already installed, perhaps by the IT team. In that instance, that's a separate type of installation file that the I-team would be installing. It is titled the Lab Edition. It is found in the admin panel and something that your administrators have access to. Now, I do want to show you, if a student is taking an assessment, how they would actually be launching that assessment. So as you can see here, I have an icon sitting on my desktop. It's in the shape of a lock, and I've titled mine LockDown Browser for Canvas. I have multiple icons here sitting on my desktop, so this is just my naming convention. Yours might simply say LockDown Browser. So from the student's perspective, I simply navigate to my desktop, and I would double click on this icon, and this is going to take me to my instance of Canvas. I should make mention of the fact that I'm running a Windows machine. So in my particular instance, it's sitting on my desktop. If I were running a Mac device, it would be in an applications folder. So this is just prompting me to log in with my student level credentials. Now, once I log in, my user interface looks a little bit different because, again, I am logged in as a student. So I'm simply navigating to my course, navigating to my quizzes. And you can see here that my geography quiz week 2 now has the requirement for LockDown Browser. Usually instructors are setting up their assessments for only one attempt. We do this pretty frequently, so ours are all set up for multiple attempts. And now you'll immediately notice a couple of things that are happening on my screen. Once the assessment itself launches, it does open up full screen. You'll notice on the top left-hand margin that my file edit menu bar has been stripped out. I am running a student edition on my personal device. So you'll notice I have a couple of options available to me in the toolbar, but my file edit menu bar is, for the most part, stripped out. The I button allows me a couple of options. It allows me to check for a newer version, zoom my text if I need to. It allows me access to a symbols palette, particularly useful with foreign language, math or science courses, or business courses. And then also the scientific calculator that my instructor enabled for use with this assessment. Now you'll notice in the top middle of the screen that the URL address field has completely been stripped out. So it's not something a student can share with another student. Also to the right, you can see here that if I try to exit this assessment, because I have early exits or I left the box unchecked in the instructor dashboard, this is allowing me that option for early exits. But you can see here the prompt initially is not to close the browser until the exam is complete or my instructor will be notified. If I try to close the browser, I will have to give the instructor a reason as to why I'm leaving the assessment. It is virtually impossible for a student to tell you that they accidentally left the assessment. It does require 3 separate mouse clicks. You'll notice at the bottom right or bottom left, depending on where the student might have their system application tray set up, that it's completely covered over. So the student can't navigate to any other application from their tray, and you should be aware that all their combination keystrokes are blocked. Also, my right mouse click is blocked. You'll notice here, I have a number of different question types. It is important to remember that from the faculty side, we do not alter the way you set up your assessments, so you can use certainly different question types. And my apologies, this is not an assessment that I created, so I probably will score rather poorly today. You can see here that I have images that are embedded. And now that the students completed their assessment, it's just a matter of submitting their quiz. A couple of other things I do want to make mention of from the instructor side is that you'll notice in the top left-hand corner that there's a Help Center button here. Now this Help Center button does not populate for the instructor when they log in to their dashboard to add the requirements for the LockDown browser for their assessments. It is a student-facing feature. This Help Center button, if the student has any difficulty when they're taking their assessment, the Help Center will allow them to run diagnostics on their machine. If you're using the webcam, you can run a webcam check, but for our purposes today, we are working strictly with LockDown Browser. The student can run a system and network check. The system check will give them an idea of what might be happening on their particular device. So if they're having any difficulty with bandwidth, their ports, or their system itself. You'll notice here that when I run my diagnostics, there's a lot that you can see from my particular machine. It will tell you a little bit about what I'm doing here. It's checking my servers and making sure that I'm meeting all my system requirements. If the student has any type of an issue during the assessment, this information can be emailed directly. You'll notice that when I click on that email, there's a system check ID number. Very important that the student doesn't wipe this out. But this is information, certainly this area can be customized to reflect your IT desk there at the school. We do recommend that support tickets are opened by admins at the school, but it is excellent information if it's possible to have this sent to us as well, because we can check from the system ID check number and determine, and there's quite a bit of information on our side that will help us to troubleshoot. And I can follow up with admins of your school with some additional Help Center information for this customization. So just a quick mention in terms of the LockDown Browser application. LockDown Browser application was built to address digital cheating and proctored types of environments. In the non-proctored types of environments, you do have access to Readiness Monitor. It is a companion application to the LockDown Browser. It allows the student to use their webcam recording their test session and does have automatic flagging built into the application. It was engineered to extend the reach of what LockDown Browser does into non-proctored environments, and certainly it integrates with Canvas and the other LMSs. Now, I do want to talk for a few minutes about tips and best practices. Now, as I referenced earlier, every institution has their own specific URL. This is just an example of what that URL might look like. From an admin perspective, once an admin logs into the customer login area, they have quite a bit of information that's available to them. Once they click on this link, they'll have access to all the software downloads, and that's where that unique URL is housed. So your system admin can provide that information to you as a faculty member, and please, as I said, the recommended practice is to make sure it's posted in a password-protected area. If there are any questions related to the application, we do recommend that support tickets are always placed by admins, and that way it gives us more information just in terms of network information that we might need in order to troubleshoot. If you have any general questions, they can certainly be sent to licensing@respondus.com, or as your account manager, you can always send me an email at adesmond, and that's ADESMOND @respondus.com. Now, from a tips and best practices perspective, we do recommend that all faculty take an assessment from the student side. If it's possible to download that client-side application to your own personal device and try taking an assessment that way, it's a great way to understand what that navigation path, how that feels to the student, and really to have a better understanding of the application itself should they ask you questions that are specific to that navigation. In terms of choosing settings for your assessments, we always do recommend that you make sure that you've added all the requirements as you see fit for the assessment, but that you confirm also within the dashboard itself that it's been set to your satisfaction. So as I said, once the assessment, the requirement for a LockDown Browser has been added, always come back to this dashboard and make sure that underneath the column for LockDown Browser, it does show up as required for you. I know when we walked through the settings themselves, it took me probably about 4 or 5 minutes to walk through adding the settings, but typically from a navigation perspective, faculty don't spend more than 30 seconds within this environment. They'll select maybe this radio box, a couple of items here, and then click Save and Close. So it is rather quick. And again, recommended practice, just that you confirm that this is showing up as required. Now, in terms of preparation for your students, we do recommend always giving a sample test in advance of a live test. This will allow your students an opportunity to make sure that all of their technology is working properly before they sit for a live assessment. We do have sample wording available on our website, as well as additional resource information, both from a student and instructor perspective. So from our website at www.respondus.com, if you were to navigate to the product area for LockDown Browser, you can see that we have a number of options that are available for you. There's a video option, and all of the videos housed here are LMS specific. So this first video just provides a brief overview of what LockDown Browser is. And it is about 2 minutes, almost 3 minutes in length. Then the second video, Preparing an Exam, walks an instructor through the dashboard portion. And there's also a student introduction video here. So this might be a nice piece that you might want to link from the student perspective, and then perhaps maybe even just ask a question from that sample test, just to confirm that the student has walked through the video and that they understand what the technology is. There's also a separate resource area that's built into the LockDown Browser area. And this website will walk through a number of brief videos. These videos here link back to that initial video bank that we just walked through. The installation of LockDown Browser here, this is actually done on the admin side. It's already been done for you. There's an instructor quick start guide that's embedded here. So if you prefer walking through the step-by-step with a quick start guide, this is available in this area. It is LMS specific. And there's also a student quick start guide here. And really that's the same principle. If you're more comfortable in linking maybe a sample test back to something like the student quick start guide and then asking a question, again, it's a great way to ensure that the student has walked through their materials and they understand what the application is. Another excellent resource that's been provided within this instructor training area, you can see that there's information to add to your syllabus. And this is just pre-built text that you're welcome to customize as you see fit. We have many faculty that will take advantage of this and customize it slightly. So you'll see here, there's just a brief explanation of what LockDown Browser is. This links to the short video of what LockDown Browser is. There's an area here where you can plug and play and enter the URL download here. And then there's also a student quick start guide that's embedded here. And then finally, there's some additional information here that just refers to some nice testing etiquette for students. And make sure you're in a location where you won't be interrupted, turn off all mobile devices, phones, etc. There's that sample overview video for students as well. Now, if there are any questions, please don't hesitate to reach back out to me directly. Certainly, I can always be reached here at adesmond@respondus.com. Are there any questions for me that I can answer for anyone here?
Yes. This is Geraldine. Ronnie, do you have any questions before I start?
No, not really.
Okay. Anna, we had a question. We were told we have multiple quizzes inside Canvas for one course, and we were told that you can't go in, take one quiz, and then just continue to the next. The LockDown browser will throw you out, and you have to go back in.
Right. You do have to close the browser and then navigate back in to take the next assessment.
Okay. You said about the shortcut on their computer. Is there a difference if they go through, or any less benefit or any issues if they click on the shortcut just to go through the lockdown browser instead of going in through Canvas, you know, the whole long way?
Right. They actually can't navigate into Canvas any other way. So for example, and let me close this down and I'll show you exactly what I mean. So if I were to open up Chrome, for example, and then I were to navigate back into Canvas again, I'm just actually logging in to, let's say, first. Right. So that was my faculty account. Now I'm just going to log in with my student level account. And again, my UI looks a little different. Navigate to my geography course, my quizzes. And this is that geography quiz week 2 that has the requirement for lockdown browser. And you can see here, I'm not allowed access to my assessment because I launched this with Google Chrome. I didn't launch it with a lockdown browser. Once the instructor adds the requirement for lockdown browser, the student must enter the assessment through the client. And again, because mine is a Windows device, my client's sitting right on my desktop. But if it were a Mac device, it would be in an applications folder.
So then the proper way is the shortcut.
Always.
Okay, that's question number 1. Is there a difference? And again, I was setting up the lockdown browser under the quiz details. I wasn't even going into that respond this on the left-hand side.
Right. Yes. So in terms of setting it up there, it is not recommended practice. It will not be supported at a later date. So it's my understanding that once the next renewal cycle rolls around, that's not even a feature that would work for you at all. I would not recommend ever doing that because you will not be able to take advantage of the dashboard feature functionality. So even if you're adding the requirement for lockdown browser, and let me actually just log back in. So you would lose the ability to use all of the functionality here. So the way that you originally were setting the requirements, that's considered a legacy setting. We cannot remove that legacy setting until every single customer advances to this point. So there's a deadline date, a drop dead date, if you will, and I believe it's the renewal date.
So then what you recommend is that I come here, I do the settings for the lockdown browser here, and then date and time and whatever else through the details in the quiz itself.
Always, because this functionality, if you set this through if you add the requirement for lockdown browser, you will not have access to this functionality. It will not work for you.
Okay. I think that was going on with us. I was doing it the old-fashioned way in college.
Right. And on our side, it's if you're looking at any of the documentation, any of the materials, whether it be student side or instructor side, there's not one area that references adding the requirement in that area for faculty. And the students, it just doesn't touch on that side of it from the student's perspective because they never touch that type of feature functionality. Those are all admin types of privileges. And that's been done intentionally because, again, we're trying to migrate everybody over to the new functionality because there's been so much engineering work done here that we want you to take advantage of. Okay,
so then definitely lockdown browser just through here, and that's it.
Always, yes.
Okay, and everything else through the regular Canvas details.
That's correct.
Now, is there a difference? There's no difference whether you upload it through Respond This or you create it in Canvas?
Right, that's correct. Lockdown browser can be used with any assessment that you have available. It doesn't have to be an assessment that was built with Respond This 4. If it is, that's great. If it's something you built in Canvas, that's great too. They'll all populate once you open up that dashboard.
And it's all the same process?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Is there a way of a master setting to avoid this, for everything to be uploaded with the Respondus Lockdown browser?
There is not, because
Okay.
the goal is to allow instructors to have some flexibility in which assessments they choose to use it with. Not every instructor always wants to use Lockdown Browser with every assessment. Some instructors might give some quizzes that they feel are lend themselves to maybe open notebook types of testing where they may not be using Lockdown Browser.
Okay, now here's a quick question. If, let's say, one student or a faculty member goes in there and takes the quiz with the Lockdown Browser, but let's say afterwards, for whatever reason, we want to take it off so everybody else can take it without. Is that possible, or no? Once you use it, it's locked?
Once you've added the requirement, my only suggestion would be is if there's for example, 30 students in the room, you make sure that you should not be altering that setting while students are still in the middle of taking that assessment, because it will create problems for you just in terms of some students having access, some others won't. You might get some error messages if you try to switch it while students are still taking the assessment.
So if one student takes it with that, leave it alone.
Once you've added the requirement, I would always recommend leave it alone. Okay. But certainly if your window for the assessment is passed, so say you give a window of 3 days, for example, for the assessment. On day 4 or day 5, you could remove that requirement and then leave it open if you prefer.
Okay.
But I would adhere to that window just to make sure that you don't have 1 or 2 students that are getting a different set of messages than the rest of the class.
Okay. And once you set it up through here, you should not have any type of errors.
No, you should not. I do want to make mention to one thing, just from a semester to semester perspective. If you are in the habit of copying over your courses or copying over your assessments, you should be aware that a course copy does require that the instructor open this dashboard 1 time in order for all the settings to copy over.
So, for example, we have a master that gets copied over with certain information, and that's where the new terms are created from. That would be an example of if I were to none of our assessments are copied over. None of them. Maybe the mock quiz. It's a mock quiz. Okay. So I would have to go in there and here for the mock quiz.
Right. So just to kind of in reference, exactly making the same example that you just made. If you have 1 quiz that's copied over, then what you want to do is open this dashboard once. You don't have to open the quiz itself. Just open the dashboard. Once all of these quizzes open, that requirement at that point will be carried over. So you don't have to go in and open any quiz individually to add the requirement. But if you're doing any type of course copy, you should be aware that the dashboard has to be open once for that course.
So like an activation type thing.
It is. So, and I would caution you and say this, if you ever get a fix-it button, so say, starting the January semester, an instructor contacts you and says, oh, we have this fix-it error that keeps coming up. You can be sure that they copied something over and they have not opened the dashboard. That's what that refers to.
And it could be any one of us. Doesn't matter. There are multiple people that have developer access, and so it could be any one of us.
Right. As long as the dashboard for the course is opened once, then that carries over the settings for Lockdown Browser.
Okay.
If it's been copied. But again, if it's a new assessment that you're giving, you're walking through that same process. You open up the assessment, you add the requirement. That just refers to any of the course copies or the assessment copy overs.
Okay.
Okay?
Got it.
That's for future reference. You shouldn't be seeing that now, but again, for the following term, you should be aware of that.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, so at this point, I can stop the recording for you, certainly. And that way there you have that clean copy, and then we can talk a little bit about Readiness 4.